Hello, YouTube. Hopefully everybody can hear me. This is my very first proper live stream, not counting the test that I did last week. So it'll take me a few seconds to work out and remember how to get this doing everything I want it to do. But basically, this morning I am going to be tier ranking movies and TV shows about Robin Hood. I should, excuse me, I should say as a disclaimer, it's not every single movie or TV show ever made about Robin Hood because I haven't seen them all, but hopefully it's a pretty decent selection. Yeah, there's some really obscure ones in there that I happen to like. I've tried to hit most of the kind of quite well-known ones. Yeah. And it's just occurring to me, did I remember to include the BBC one? Looking through my little setup. Yes, I did. Good. It's in there. Okay. So I now need to remember how to share my screen, which I remember it took me about 10 minutes to do last time. So it's going to be, share screen. Here we are. Right. Now, does that mean you can also see me in the bottom corner? Yes. So hopefully, right, no, I want to just get rid of that box there. No, go away. Not you, the box. Okay. Hopefully this is now set up so that anybody watching this, which nobody's watching live right now, which is not surprising because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I am restricted by needing to do this when the toddler is at daycare, because I don't want to be that viral clip of the poor guy being interviewed on the BBC. So yeah, it's a bit of an awkward time. So I know that like most people are going to watch this much later on a recording, which is absolutely fine. So apologies for the faffing. Yes, it does mean that I can't test that anything is working until somebody actually joins and watches it live. I can't completely tell whether any of this is working properly or not. As far as I know, it should be. I haven't worked out a way to get the chat to come up on the screen, which is something I'm just going to have to do another time. But hopefully what can be seen clearly on the screen is both me and the tier ranking. So I think what I'll do, volume's up, everything should be good. What I'm going to do, I am going to give the dog a treat so she can say hello, because she always has to say hello on every Zoom or Teams meeting or anything. Dog always has to say hello. And just see if anybody's able to make it actually live. And then if not, I will just carry on and it will just come up on the recorded version, and just fingers crossed it's working. Let's just really, really hope that it's working. Okay, I'll give the dog a treat and then I'll get started. Freya! Where is she? Where are you? There you go. High five. Paw. Paw. Good paw. Other paw. Good other paw. High five. High five. Yeah, you can see nicely. There you go. High five. Yeah, you're a good girl. There you go. Okay, you go lay down. Bed. Bed. Okay. Right. Excuse me. I am just going to get started. Sip of coffee. Okay. Just pray that this works and is working. I don't like not being able to test this. Okay. Right. Never mind. Carry on. Right. So this is the screen that I am sharing, hopefully. There we are. Oh, I need to try and keep an eye on the chat, which I don't completely know how to do at the same time as doing this, because I am flicking between screens. Can I make the chat pop out? Pop out chat. That sounds like what I want. Oh, no, it's not really doing what I want it to do either. No, never mind. I think it might just be a case of I just keep flicking back and forth because I'm still learning how to do this, really. I will get better at it as time goes on, because I'm sure there is a way to be able to see everything all at once, and then I can keep an eye on the chat as well, but never mind. Right. I'm still trying to clear this information box. Never mind. I think I'm just going to have to ignore it. Okay, 5 minutes in. I need to get going. I'm going to do these in the reverse order that they appear on here. Just because I want to kind of work up to the really famous and really well-known ones rather than start with them and then work backwards toward some really, really obscure ones. I'm hoping the volume is all right. I've turned the volume up as high as it'll go. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Okay, so we will start with the one that I watched most recently, which is the 2018 Taron Egerton starring Robin Hood film. This is one of the two most recent ones, 2010 and 2018, and both of them are going for this kind of grittier take on it. They're trying to be kind of they want to be sort of violent and down to earth in different ways, though. This is a really interesting kind of mishmash of stuff. So when I'm ranking these, I'm not ranking them in terms of accuracy, because that is not relevant to a Robin Hood movie. Robin Hood is folklore, is legend, and may or may not have been inspired by a real person, but even the very earliest ballads will like have him be from Yorkshire and Nottingham at the same time. So I'm not looking for accuracy. That's not really relevant to Robin Hood. And I don't mind if it's not accurate to the period either. But I think it's interesting what choices filmmakers and TV shows make about how to depict this story, and whether they're going for a kind of realistic historical period movie vibe or whether they go for something else. And there's usually kind of three ways of approaching the costumes and the sets and all that side of things. You can try and make them look like properly medieval, like a proper reasonably historically accurate period drama. You can do the like school fantasy version of medieval, which is like bright green, pointy, very, very nice bright green pointy hat, Peter Pan like looking costume. Dresses for the women that you could buy something pretty similar on Amazon, as I did for Hendo a few years back, which is fine as well. Gives this kind of fantasy medieval vibe. Or you can not do either of those things and do something completely different. And this 2018 movie is directed by Otto Bathurst, and it's interesting because the costuming is not medieval on any level, really. It kind of vaguely nods towards thinking that it might be inspired by something medieval. But Otto Bathurst had worked on Peaky Blinders, which does some of this to a lesser extent. It's much more interested in making you think about other movies than anything to do with history or even legend or folklore. So they look like they're wearing flak jackets and they're in like the Gulf War or something when they're in the Crusades. And that's fine. The costuming itself, like the sheriff is dressed kind of like a Nazi. The costuming itself I find quite interesting. I don't mind what they did with the costumes. I love A Knight's Tale. Brilliant movie, which has like crazy spiky hair and a Queen soundtrack. So I don't mind creative anachronism. This movie is a bit weird because it goes beyond just the costuming and the sets. and into how the story works. So not only do they look like they're wearing flak jackets, but they also kind of they're treating bows and arrows like they're guns. Um, so I have friends who do archery and they never watch a movie without complaining that the archery is inaccurate. I don't know if there is any movie that actually treats archery accurately. Let me know if you do archery and you've ever found a movie that actually represents archery like properly. Um, so yeah, I'm not expecting accurate depictions of medieval archery, but the way this movie treats it is a bit strange because they proper treat bows and arrows like they're guns. And bows and arrows are not guns. There's quite significant differences between bows and arrows and guns. And it's just a bit strange. Um, so I found the whole movie, watching the movie, just a bit of a weird experience. And then there's also the whole issue of accents in Robin Hood movies. Now, personally, I don't really care what accent anyone has in a Robin Hood movie because they wouldn't be speaking modern English anyway. They would be speaking Middle English or Norman French, and the accent wouldn't be the same. Shakespeare lived hundreds of years later than Robin Hood would have lived, potentially lived. And he probably spoke with an accent closer to a modern American accent than a modern English accent. People have worked that out by looking at the kind of rhyme schemes of the poetry. So Kevin Costner's probably more accurate than most other Robin Hoods. So I'm not bothered by the accents. I do find it slightly odd when movies like this have anybody not from the British Isles faking some kind of English accent. Fine. So anyone from Australia or America is faking. That's fine. But then anybody Irish, North or South, and both are here, is using their own accent. And it's like, well, if all the Australians and the Americans are putting on some variety of English accent, why aren't the Irish putting on an English accent? Because these characters are not Irish, they're English. And so they had a character from the North, a character from the South. And then there was this scene where the Northern Irish character, who then turns out to be the bad guy and has been all along, is leading a bunch of people with petrol bombs, which again did not exist in the medieval period, against police with riot gear. Again, if they'd set it in the Roman period, you could have a bunch of soldiers with like big rectangular shields holding off a riot, and that would make some kind of sense. But in the medieval period, no. And I'm just like, I don't need this. Because my family are Northern Irish, and when I'm enjoying like a Robin Hood movie, I just don't need to be thinking about the troubles in the middle of a Robin Hood movie. Like Robin Hood is escapism. I don't. It's a personal thing. It's an artistic choice that's entirely valid for that director to make. There's nothing wrong with it. But personally, I don't like it. So I wasn't super keen on this movie. It's quite derivative of other things in various ways. It's got a lot of influence from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Huge influence. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves wasn't the first one to have a kind of Saracen character, or Moorish or Saracen character. That was an 80s series called Robin of Sherwood that isn't in here because I haven't seen it. But it definitely popularized it. So Jamie Foxx's character obviously owes a lot to Morgan Freeman's character from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I like that they blended in with Little John. That was kind of cool. I liked making Little John the Moorish character. That was kind of a fun combination. That worked. And Little John as kind of Robin Hood's right-hand man fits with some of the earliest ballads. I liked Tim Minchin as Friar Tuck. But overall, it was just odd and just kind of not very Robin Hood. The performances are good, but the movie itself just kind of didn't really do it for me. So, I forgot to go through my categories. I'm not used to doing live streams. These are my categories for the tier ranking. So, bottom is the Sheriff of Rottingham. Not good. Then we've got quoting Worf from TNG, I am not a merry man, which is next level up, which is kind of not great. Okay, not awful. Slap bang in the middle, the romantic ballad in the Disney film. That part in the Disney cartoon, which we'll get to, where it just kind of stops and there's this very romantic song. It's nice, but it's a bit it's a bit just there. So that's why that's the third, the one in the this is the one that's slap bang in the middle and is just kind of, yep, that's a scene that happened in the movie and it's fine and it's kind of nice. The King's Deer, this is good. These are really good. Something that is luxurious and rich and meaty. And then obviously the top tier, he split Philip's arrow, which is a quote from the Errol Flynn movie, but that features in an awful lot of versions of the story of Robin Hood, as Robin splitting somebody's arrow to win the archery contest. So that's the top, best of the best. So this Taron Egerton one, I mean, it's going to be one of the lower two, either the Sheriff of Rottingham or I Am Not a Merry Man. I didn't really enjoy it all that much, I must admit. It's not that it hasn't got anything decent in it. There's good performances. There's some fun ideas. There was stuff I liked in there. But it's not amazing. I feel like I'm going to put it down there. Okay, next is something quite obscure and very short. So there was a BBC sitcom in the 80s and just about into 91, I think, called Blackadder, which took place each series in a different historical period. And then for the millennium, 1999, they made a final half-hour special called Blackadder Back and Forth, where a contemporary Blackadder character made what he didn't build the time machine. His servant Baldric, who's always the butt of all the jokes and very stupid, but Baldric built a time machine because he was following specs from Leonardo da Vinci. So they go collecting items from across history in this time machine. So they visit several historical periods within half an hour. So it's an incredibly short clip. It's very funny if you want to find it on YouTube. It has the late Rick Mayall as Robin Hood, and he's playing Robin as his recurring character in a couple of different historical periods across the show of Flashheart or Lord Flashheart. And in this case, Flashheart as Robin Hood. So Flashheart is a womanizer with an enormous ego that Blackadder absolutely hates. So I really enjoyed the skit. I thought it was really funny. Anytime Lord Flashheart appears, it's just makes me laugh. It's silly, but it's funny. They have Kate Moss as Maid Marian. They said, oh, we had to recast Maid Marian. And I was a bit kind of, why? Because they had an actress whose name I've now forgotten, sorry, who played the love interest who kept running off with Flashheart in the series. And it was a bit kind of, was she unavailable or is that ageism? Why did it have to suddenly turn into Kate Moss instead of the actress you had before? But Kate Moss did fine, and she's obviously incredibly beautiful. So yeah, look it up on YouTube if you haven't seen it. It's really funny. The whole episode, it's only half an hour, and it's very, very funny. So I'm going to put that in there. It was probably not like the most standout moment Blackadder's ever done, but it was fun. Okay, what's next? Doctor Who. Doctor Who, Robot of Sherwood. So this is from series 8 of the new well, 2005 to 2022 is how the BBC now labels it on the iPlayer. That bit of Doctor Who. Peter Capaldi as the Doctor and Jenna Coleman as Clara, the companion. This is an early one for Capaldi, so he is in prime grumpiness. Capaldi's Doctor was very grumpy, especially for his first series. So they put him against this very jovial Robin Hood. But there's some nice touches in here. The episode is written by Mark Gatiss, who does a lot of stuff I really like. And there are some nice undertones of kind of melancholy. The Doctor thinks Robin Hood is not real. So this is my favorite thing about this episode. It plays with this constant kind of dialogue about, is Robin Hood real or not? A lot of historians will say Robin Hood isn't real. It's a folklore, it's legend, it's folklore, and it's fiction, basically. There is no real Robin Hood. Other historians suggest that Robin Hood is inspired by a real person. So obviously the actual stories as we have them are like fiction, but there may have been a real person with a similar name who lived in the Greenwood, and may or may not have helped out poor people, or may have just stolen. But anyway, might have been a real inspiration. And this is the kind of constant conversation that's always going on in literature scholars and historians. And the episode is kind of about that because the Doctor is convinced that Robin isn't real and that he must be like an alien or a robot or an imposter or something like that. So he keeps saying, "You're not real, you're not real, you're not real." And one of the things he keeps saying is, "You laugh too much." And then Clara says, "Well, you laugh so much because you're really sad," which is, of course, a very true statement about human nature in general. And I really like that. And yeah, it turns out, I should have said, sorry, spoiler alert for all of these on the video. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. But anyway, it turns out that Robin is real and all his merry men. And I like that. I mean, it's always fun when there's a story about a myth or a legend turning out to be real. And it's possible, entirely possible, that that's the case. And I like that the Doctor ends up being proved right. I like this kind of dialogue about the Doctor insisting that it's all not real, but then he's proved wrong and they are real. There's some fun stuff with robots as well. The Sheriff of Nottingham gets probably one of his nastiest deaths in the kids show that I showed my 3-year-old last night. The 3-year-old luckily didn't know what was going on. He falls into a vat of molten gold. It's quite icky. Anyway, really enjoyed the episode. Yeah, I wouldn't put it with like Doctor Who's best ever episodes, but it's definitely good fun. And if you have never watched Doctor Who, you don't need to really know anything going into this episode. You know, the Doctor's kind of grumpy. He has a machine that travels in time and space and looks like a police box. Clara's his companion. Clara's costume looks like a fantasy costume because, of course, she's pulled it out of the Doctor's wardrobe. She's a time traveler. She's a modern person. So she's wearing this dress that does look like she might have bought it off Amazon, which is entirely appropriate. So, yeah, I'm going to put that up here, I think, in the King's Deer. I thought it was a good, fun episode, and it would be a pretty good introduction to Doctor Who. It doesn't really tie into any ongoing storylines. You don't really need to know anything to watch it. So if you fancy just giving Doctor Who a go, that's not a bad place to start. Okay, next, along the same theme, is the next Star Trek: The Next Generation, Qpid, which is an episode. So if you're not familiar with Star Trek, Q is this kind of omnipotent, omniscient, immortal being. Gene Roddenberry was really keen on this kind of story in original series Star Trek, and Gene Roddenberry was still around when they were making the early seasons of TNG. And then that's where Q comes in. He's in the pilot episode, and this is a later episode which features him. And Q he's very mischievous and he likes to cause trouble. So he puts the crew of the Enterprise plus Picard's girlfriend into it's never entirely, I'm sure if it's entirely clear if it's a simulation or if it's meant to actually be medieval England. The costuming definitely looks on the fantasy side either way, but anyway, yeah, for reasons, he basically ends up stealing Picard's girlfriend over the course of the episode. And I think my favorite parts of the episode were stuff like so Picard has this kind of on again, off again, are they doing it behind the scenes with Dr. Crusher, who turns up for breakfast and finds him with another woman, which is quite funny. And then she tries to get Riker, who's the biggest womanizer on the ship, to show the woman around. She's clearly trying to get her to run off with Riker instead of Picard. So all that kind of stuff was good fun. The Robin Hood stuff was fine. Unlike the Doctor Who episode, I don't think it had anything particularly interesting to say about Robin Hood as a legend. It was more just using it like that they often did these holodeck gone wrong episodes where they'd be on the holodeck enacting some kind of fantasy in their holograms, and then it would go wrong, so they'd have to like be in a western or a detective show or whatever. And it's really more like one of those, even though it's Q in this case. So I don't think it's quite as effective as the Doctor Who episode, especially in terms of like doing something relating to Robin Hood. But it does give us the classic quote of Worf standing there going, "I am not a merry man," which I do love and obviously used for one of the categories. So ironically, it won't go in that category. It's going to go in the middle, the romantic ballad in the Disney film category. I'm just going to grab a mouthful of coffee. Okay, next up is a Disney movie from the 50s, which is available on Disney Plus, starring Richard Todd. who I know primarily from the film Dam Busters, the 1950s film Dam Busters, about the attack on 3 German dams by the RAF. If you've never seen Dam Busters, definitely go watch Dam Busters. It's absolutely brilliant. So this is Richard Todd in Robin Hood. This is kind of fun. The main thing I liked about this was the appearance of Richard and John's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So, I haven't talked about this yet. Robin Hood, historically, if he was a real person, might have lived during the reign of Richard the Lionheart, who was off on crusade for most of his reign. He might have lived during the reign of Richard's brother John, who succeeded him. Or he might have lived during the reign of John's brother, Henry III, who succeeded him. There was a major rebellion of barons under Simon de Montfort during the reign of Henry III, which is the mid 13th century. And it may be that if there was a real Robin Hood, he might actually have been involved in that. Or he may have lived in the reign of John, or he may have, if he was real, genuinely lived when he gets put in all these films and TV shows, which is the reign of Richard. All of kind of the modern versions usually put him in the reign of Richard. There are 3 examples here that are set in the reign of John, which we will get to. Usually he's in the reign of Richard, and there was this incident during Richard's reign. Richard went off on the Third Crusade, fought that for a while, came back, got kidnapped, and was held for ransom. I think in Vienna by the Holy Roman Emperor, if I remember right. Correct me, anybody, if I'm wrong. He's held for ransom, and his mother, so Eleanor of Aquitaine, is such a character. She was married to 2 kings, first of France and then of England. She had 8 children. 3 of them became monarchs. I think one of her daughters was married to a king somewhere, but Richard and John both become kings of England. She helped her sons in a rebellion against their father and then got imprisoned for 16 years for doing so. John was not so much her favorite. She preferred Richard. Yeah, she is an amazing, awesome historical character. Love Eleanor of Aquitaine. And she's still around. She lived through all of Richard's reign, and she died a few years into John's reign. So when most of these stories take place, she's still around. She appears in a couple of them, but not very often. So bonus points to anything that has Eleanor of Aquitaine in it, and especially if she's being cool. And in this, she is. I forget the name of the actress who plays her, but she's 1950s Hollywood actress, and she's got this very or English actress possibly, very imperious kind of way of being. She's she commands the scene when she's in it, and she meets Marian, and she's just kind of, oh yes, I approve of you. It's a brilliant performance, and it absolutely is how I imagine Eleanor of Aquitaine, just controlling every situation, totally kind of, yes, I am in charge. I approve of you, I don't approve of you. Yeah, love it. So it definitely gets points for Eleanor of Aquitaine. It makes Robin the Earl of Huntingdon. Most versions have him the Earl or Lord of Locksley. The earliest ballads, he is neither. In the earliest ballads, Robin is very specifically a yeoman, which is a sort of a middle class, lower middle class in medieval England. So not a serf, not like the poorest of the poor, but not a lord. Definitely. I was going to say like a pleb, but that's a Roman thing. But yeah, like a lower middle class basically would be a yeoman, a tradesperson, that level of society. Medieval society. Most of these don't do that. They usually have him as the Earl of Locksley. This one has him as the Earl of Huntingdon, which was another suggestion made in the early modern period when people are sharing the ballads and looking into the history and trying to work out. This goes way back. People in the 1500s were trying to work out, was there a real Robin Hood and who was he? We've been on this for a long time. And the Earl of Huntingdon was one of the suggestions that came up in some of the later ballads as his identity. So this one makes him the Earl of Huntingdon rather than Locksley, which doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So definitely bonus points for Eleanor of Aquitaine. Otherwise, the movie is kind of fine. Yeah, it's kind of a fine 1950s kind of adventure movie. Yeah, I'm going to put it in the middle. I think it's the romantic ballad in the Disney film. It's nice. It's there. You can stick it on. There won't be anything that will upset your 3-year-old. you know, it's fun. Okay, next up, Men in Tights. I want to sing. I can't talk about Men in Tights without singing. We're men in tights, tights. Love Men in Tights. Love Men in Tights. I do appreciate the joke about being a Robin Hood who can do an English accent, even though, like I said, I don't care what accent Robin Hood has. None of them are going to be accurate anyway. But it was a funny joke. So I do appreciate the joke. There's some very funny archery stuff going on. The chastity belt stuff is quite interesting. Chastity belts are actually a bit later. Again, I don't care about accuracy in Men in Tights, but just if you're interested, chastity belts are actually a bit later. And they were actually intended to be protective more than anything else. A chastity belt stops anybody getting to you. So they're actually not this kind of cruel and repressive thing. But still, in the movie, it was very funny. The songs are really catchy. I mean, yeah, it's Mel Brooks, isn't it? Gotta love a Mel Brooks film. So, I do love Men in Tights. It's just funny. I think I'm gonna put it with The King's Deer. I think again, it's probably not my favorite comedy of all time or my favorite historical comedy of all time. I like Mel Brooks a lot. I think for me, I tend to enjoy things like Monty Python's Life of Brian even more. Monty Python's Life of Brian again has stuff to say about the period it's about, and it says it in a very Python way. But the Pythons, two of them, I think, did history degrees. The Pythons are always kind of, there's some genuine history in there that they make fun of. In their Holy Grail, they've got the monks like hitting themselves with planks because people really did walk through the streets flagellating themselves in that period to show their Christian devotion. So, yeah, I love Mel Brooks. I love his History of the World. It's funny. I definitely enjoy it. It's up there in The King's Deer. Really good. Just again, doesn't quite say enough about the history to pip it for me, but still, definitely love it. Next up, Robin and Marian from the 70s. So I watched this a long time ago. When I was a kid, my mum really likes it. This is one of 3 films set during the reign of John rather than during the reign of Richard. Slightly different approaches in the 3 films. Robin and Marian is the only one that adapts the stories about Robin Hood's death, and these go back to the very earliest ballads. There's a ballad specifically on the death of Robin Hood, and it's also covered in the Jest of Robin Hood. And the story of Robin Hood's death is that he's injured, and then he goes to a priory where he knows the abbess. She is a relation of his, but she betrays him. Usually there's a lover involved. And she poisons him, and he shoots an arrow out of the window and says, "Bury me where the arrow lands," to Little John, who's with him. And this film, it does something very interesting with that story. So it's the only one that adapts it anyway. And it makes the abbess, Marian, sorry, I'm completely spoiling it. It's worth watching anyway, even though I've spoiled the ending. Basically, it turns it into a sort of murder-suicide where Robin is badly injured. They're also older. So it's Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn in the 70s. So they're not like decrepit, but they are older. And she says basically, you know, you're too badly injured. She has become a nun after he left. So they've had their adventures in their younger days in the reign of Richard, and then he's gone off again. Richard spent barely any time in England. He was on crusade, then he was kidnapped for a couple of years. I didn't finish that story I was telling earlier about Eleanor of Aquitaine. I got distracted. So basically, the whole thing with John raising taxes to pay Richard's ransom but actually take it for himself is inspired by the real history, where John was trying to conspire with the King of France to pay the Holy Roman Emperor to keep Richard, as opposed to their mother Eleanor, who raised the money to ransom Richard and was eventually successful. And of course, that meant that both Eleanor and John are trying to raise money from the people of England at the same time for different purposes. And nobody has any money. And that's the inspiration behind all these stories about the excessive taxation. Obviously, American versions later really pick up on the excessive taxation angle because that fits with America's interests after the War of Independence. So yeah, I got halfway through that story earlier and I forgot to finish it. So yes, Richard, once his mother has got him released, does come back to England briefly, but then he goes off again and he dies fighting in. He owns half of France at this point. Eleanor of Aquitaine is called that because she owns the Aquitaine in France. Um, so he spends most of his time then in his French lands. So Robin has gone off with Richard, and Marian, upset at Robin having kind of abandoned her, has then become a nun, and that's how she's ended up as the prioress, for that adaptation of the story of his death. It's also written by the same writer as a film called The Lion in Winter, which is brilliant. Love it. Not on this list 'cause it's not about Robin Hood. The Lion in Winter is about Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine and their marriage and their sons. It also features Richard, John, and Geoffrey, who was dead by the time Richard died. Geoffrey died before Richard. But at the time the film is set, it's Richard, John, and Geoffrey. Geoffrey's also the kind of unloved one that nobody likes, and John is Henry's favourite, and Richard is Eleanor's favourite. And Richard is depicted as very brutal, very violent in that film. John is kind of an idiot. And those characterizations then, because it's the same screenwriter, carry through to Robin and Marian. So they would make a rather good pair of films. Definitely recommend Lion in Winter if you haven't seen it. It's so good. Love Lion in Winter. So I like Robin and Marian. It's very bittersweet, obviously. Again, depending what you want from your Robin Hood movie. Because it's not cheerful. It's not the kind of joyful pick-me-up that I'm often looking for when I watch a Robin Hood movie. But it is about the death of Robin Hood, so that is the point, and it is a really interesting adaptation of some of the very oldest Robin Hood stories. It's really interesting seeing the different setting, the different characterization of Richard. Richard is so often just this kind of literal knight in shining armor that turns up at the end, and he's the good king, and everybody's loyal to Richard, and we hate John. And I mean, John was not a popular king at all. Like, John was not up there with our greatest kings, but nor was Richard. I mean, I think that's also what's so great about The Lion in Winter. They're honestly as bad as each other in different ways. So um, it's got that really interesting characterization of Richard. So I think it's going to have to go in The King's Deer, just because it just doesn't have the joy that I really like, that I'm really looking for in a Robin Hood story. But it is very, very good. Highly recommend. Oh, mouthful of coffee. Excuse me. So next up is the Russell Crowe one, which I watched at the cinema many years ago and then again last night to try and refresh my memory. So this is the 2010 film, and it is the second of the three set during the reign of John. This one is interesting. This actually shifts the Robin Hood story altogether. So both Robin and Marian, and the other example coming up in a bit, which is Princess of Thieves, they are both set deliberately later. Robin Hood's heyday is in the past, and the film is set later, and that's why it's set, the death of Richard happens at the beginning, and then it's set during the reign of John. Whereas this one, the 2010 Ridley Scott directed film with Russell Crowe, is set during the reign of John and puts Robin Hood's activity during the reign of John, which, as I say, I mean, quite apart from the fact there's no such thing as accurate anyway, is a time that if there was a real Robin Hood, he might have lived entirely plausibly. So nothing wrong with that. It's quite interesting. A bit of a slightly older Robin Hood. I mean, none of the others are like super young. They're usually in their 30s, sometimes 20s. Can't remember how old Russell Crowe was in 2010, but I think a little bit older, a bit of an older Robin Hood, interestingly. It's going for a very gritty, like, period medieval vibe. None of the fantastical side of things in this one. It's got some great action sequences. It really wants to be a war movie, which isn't impossible in a Robin Hood story, given that the Crusades are part of the story. Richard gets kidnapped, but it shifts an invasion of England by France that happened later in John's reign to the beginning of John's reign, so that it can have this kind of weird reverse Normandy landings where the French land on British beaches. Yeah, it does some interesting things with the story. I think my favorite thing about it is Kate Blanchett, who's brilliant. She is mesmerizing in this film, as in any film, quite frankly. Um, Again, as a slightly older Marian, and Marian in this film. So this film actually also does have Robin Hood as not a lord as well, because in this film he is masquerading as Robert, the Earl or Lord of Locksley. And Robin himself is somebody called Robin Longstride, and he is an archer for Richard. So he would be of about that yeoman level. So it is more accurate to Robin's kind of social origins, except that he's pretending to be the Lord of Locksley. And Marian is Locksley's widow because Locksley dies at the beginning of the movie. So this is a slightly older Marian and not a maid. Marian as an experienced widow whose main motivation is kind of looking after her blind father-in-law. The blind characters, I'm sure, are inspired by Prince of Thieves, although it might go further back than that. But the blind servant in Prince of Thieves definitely recurs in a few places. So yeah, Kate Blanchett as Marian is absolutely brilliant. Marian herself is not in the earliest ballads, so you can really kind of do what you want with Marian. She is probably come across from French tradition in the early modern period. So Marian is part of the later developing tradition of Robin Hood, but you wouldn't want to do without her now. And also there aren't really any women in the earliest stories. Eleanor of Aquitaine doesn't really appear. It's men living in the greenwood. And apart from the abbess that poisons Robin, there really isn't much. There's specific references to Robin treating women well and never hurting women, but there's not much actual appearances of women in these stories. So you always want Marian. You wouldn't want to get rid of her. But she doesn't have to be a maid, and this one isn't. She is a widow. So I like that. I think the main issue I have with Russell Crowe and Ridley Scott doing this is it's not as good as Gladiator. And it just, so my favorite movies of all time are Gladiator, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Titanic, and Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And those are my absolute favorite movies of all time. So the problem with this one is it's reminding me of two of them because it's making me want to watch Gladiator or Lord of the Rings. Both of which are better than this one. So it's not that this movie is terrible by any means, but it's not as good as those. I think I'm probably going to put it here. I like it. It's doing interesting things. It's got good stuff in it, but again, it's just not quite kind of. It's not what I'm looking for from Robin Hood, and none of what it's doing is kind of interesting or effective enough to push it up into the next category. All right, the next one is the BBC series, and I have to confess, I've only seen a few episodes of it, and I feel bad ranking it when I've not seen it all. But obviously, time is limited, and that would be a heck of a lot of TV to watch just so I can do a tier ranking, and I didn't want to not talk about it, so I'm going to rank it. I will accept that I probably should be watching more of it to give it a ranking. This one was known at the time as like the hoodie Robin Hood. There was a whole bunch of stuff in the British press at the time about kids wearing hoodies. It was a thing. And then the costuming is kind of that slightly modernized take on medieval costumes. And everybody said it looked like Robin was wearing a hoodie. It's got good points and bad points. Richard Armitage as the Sheriff of Nottingham, this really made his name, obviously known better now as Thorin from The Hobbit. But he's great. Richard Armitage is one of those people you can just watch. He's really, really good. The first episode I saw of it was, I think it was the season 2 finale or something. I saw it on a plane, and again, big spoiler warning, killed off Maid Marian. And I'd not watched any of the show before, and I'm on a plane going, what am I going to watch? And I pick the show, and I look at it, and I'm like, what? So maybe that made more sense if you actually watched the whole show. Picking up on it there was a bit like, what is going on? And then I had a look at the first couple episodes for doing this list, and it just wasn't grabbing me. It followed on from Merlin, starring Colin Morgan, which ran for 5 years, and it took that slot in the BBC's schedule for a kind of children's family young adult show inspired by British myth. It was followed later by the Greek myth inspired Atlantis. And, I think it's better than Atlantis, but not as good as Merlin. And it hasn't grabbed me enough. Like, I haven't watched more episodes because it was a chore to watch them. And it was like, "Oh, I just can't devote that much time to one bit of a tier ranking." So it's going to go in I Am Not a Merry Man, with the proviso that it possibly should be higher if I had watched more of it. But between the weird choice to kill off Maid Marian, I mean, if the actress was leaving, you can recast or you can send her away. Or, I don't know, it was weird. And just not grabbing me, it's going to go there. We are getting towards some of the good stuff now, because the next one is the Disney movie. Love it. Love it. This has an amazing voice cast. Obviously, it's made in, was it the 60s, this one? People who are not necessarily well known now, but Terry Thomas and Peter Ustinov, these are huge stars, huge comedy stars at the time. So the whole thing of casting celebrities to voice Disney cartoon characters, it's not new. It didn't start with the genie in Aladdin. That just is one of the best known ones that popularized it. But these are serious megastars for the time in the voices, and they're brilliant. So Terry Thomas is the snake, and Peter Ustinov is John. I think he plays Richard as well. And oh God, I just love it. I love John in this. And the best thing, of course, although we don't see her, the constant when he yells, "Mommy!" And Sir Hiss is threatening to tell his mother. His mother is Eleanor of Aquitaine. So as a kid, I just thought it was funny. Now I'm watching a cartoon and the bad guy is sucking his thumb and calling for his mummy. It's funny. And then as an adult, knowing the history, I watched it and I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's Eleanor of Aquitaine. I think I might have that reaction if she was my mother. And like the idea of John just like being scared of his mother and he's calling out for mummy, but of course he's not her favorite. Richard was. There's actually a whole lot of history behind that that you just don't notice when you're little. And it's brilliant. And the music's brilliant. It's a classic Disney film, so it opens with the storybook, which of course is completely appropriate to Robin Hood, who may or may not have been inspired by a real person, but who is by this point, fiction. And the song about Robin Hood and Little John is great. But yeah, my favorite thing about this one is definitely Prince John and Sir Hiss. Absolutely love them. I was going to downgrade it to The King's Deer for that romantic ballad in the middle, which just completely slows down the pace of the movie. And as a kid, I was a bit kind of, what's happening now? But it is extremely pretty. And also, I think I am not going to downgrade the entire movie just for one quite nice, pretty song. So we're going up to the top level. He split Philip's arrow, top tier Robin Hood filmmaking. Absolutely love it. Next up is one I hadn't heard of until quite recently. This is a made-for-TV Disney movie starring Keira Knightley back in 2001 as Robin's daughter Gwyn. I can only assume they named her after Guinevere from King Arthur, who Keira Knightley played a few years later. I think that's probably the thinking there on the fact she's called Gwyn. So it's made in 2001, but it is very 90s. You can feel the 90s coming out of it, even though technically it's early noughties. It's very cheesy. There's a lot of soft focus. The male lead is played by Vampire Bill from True Blood, who is actually English. His real accent is English, and so this is him with his real accent, very, very young. He is playing Richard's illegitimate son, Philip. So this is the third and final of the films set in the reign of John rather than Richard, for the same reason as Robin and Marian, although Robin's still alive, which is that Robin's heyday was a few years ago, and this film is set a bit later, obviously starring his daughter, Gwyn, the Princess of Thieves. Marian's been killed off because she's got dead mother and a children's story syndrome. It's good fun. It is super cheesy. Keira Knightley's a good actress. Like, if you watch the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, watch The Duchess, she is a very talented actress. She was often given, in the early noughties, these parts where she was playing like spunky girl. Like it's all very girl power. It's all very 90s, where in order to be an exciting female lead, she has to like yell about how unfair it is. I mean, I'm not disagreeing, obviously. Medieval society was very sexist and it was very unfair, but she's like yelling about how unfair it is that she can't do stuff because she's a girl, and then she disguises herself as a boy. And it's fine. Like, there's nothing, like I said, I don't disagree with any of that. It's very earnest, it's very shouty. She suits the short haircut when she's pretending to be a boy very well. And there's, like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a bit cheesy. It's very, very 90s. But Vampire Bill with his real accent is quite fun. So in real life, the story of the movie is that they don't want John to be king, and then they're not wrong. John was not a good king. So they want Richard's illegitimate son Philip to be king instead. Now, in real life, there wasn't really much of a mechanism in England to legitimize illegitimate children. Wales is completely different. So obviously, the United Kingdom is a kingdom of different kingdoms, and there's a lot of separation, especially in this period, even though England and Wales are completely separate in this period. And Wales has completely different rules about legitimacy. It's some of the inspiration for Dawn in Game of Thrones. But in England, there is no question of the illegitimate child of a monarch being their heir. So a few years earlier, the anarchy had kicked off because Henry I had no surviving male legitimate children. He had illegitimate male children, and he had a legitimate daughter. But the man who fought her for the throne, Stephen, was her cousin, not her half-brother. So in England, there really isn't any suggestion of illegitimate children of royals becoming king or queen. It's going to be a female legitimate child, or it's going to be a cousin or a nephew or some legitimate relation. So very, very different in Wales, but that's the situation in England. So there was a rival claimant. When Richard died, he had one illegitimate son, but no legitimate children. John, his younger brother, is still alive, and his nephew, who was the son of his brother Geoffrey, was still alive. So Geoffrey had died, but Geoffrey's son, legitimate son, was alive. And it was Geoffrey's son, Arthur, who did make a rival claim on the throne, but John won. So there was a rival to the throne when Richard died, because Richard had no legitimate children. But it wasn't Philip. I always thought Richard was gay, but clearly he was bisexual, which obviously makes perfect sense. In Lion in Winter, he's portrayed as primarily homosexual, but yeah, clearly he was presumably bi, because he did have a son. He was keen enough to have an illegitimate son, so presumably he was bisexual. Anyway, so cheesy Keira Knightley 90s one. I mean, it's going to be either the romantic ballad in a Disney film or I Am Not a Merry Man, because it's not amazing. It is some pure 90s cheese. It's another one that's fairly safe to stick on if you have your toddler in the room. So it's got that going for it. It's kind of fun. Vampire Bill's kind of fun. Yeah, stick it. Oh, whoops, no, not that high. Stick it over there. Okay, only 3 to go. I've been going for nearly an hour, I'm realizing now. And I'm not editing this. It mustn't take too long. 3 more, because I'm saving the best till last. A lot of you may not know Maid, Marian and Her Merry Men. This was a children's TV series from the late 80s and early 90s. It was written by and starring Sir Tony Robinson, best known as Baldric from Blackadder. And he also presented Time Team, which is this series about people doing archaeological digs really, really quickly that was really popular in the 90s and the noughties on Channel 4, I think. So Tony Robinson has form with history-related TV. And he wrote and starred as the Sheriff of Nottingham in this series, Maid, Marian and Her Merry Men, which, as you can tell from the title, focuses on Marian. And in this case, basically the idea is that the whole merry men stealing from the rich, giving to the poor thing is all Maid Marian's idea. Robin, I did not realise as a child and watched it back as an adult, is clearly meant to be gay, or at least extremely camp. Robin is mostly into designing the outfits. It also has Danny John Jules, who played the cat in Red Dwarf, as one of the Merry Men. A couple of other actors who were quite big in 80s and 90s British sitcoms. Yeah, I absolutely adored this series as a child. Absolutely loved it. As a kid, it was just the most hilarious thing I'd ever seen. One of my favorite jokes, because you know how much I love a bad joke, was the two guards who were always kind of stupid. Would be like, one of them said, do you want to meet my pet elastic band? And the other one goes, you can't have a pet elastic band. And the first one says, why not? And the other one says, because they haven't been invented yet. And like, that's my level of humor. I loved it. I loved that it focused on Marian as a little girl watching it as a kid. I wanted things that had female leads. I think that's just kind of natural in kids, that if you're a girl, you like watching things where girls get to do fun stuff and have adventures, and if you're a boy, you like watching boys do fun stuff and have adventures, and you can both enjoy both. But it's always nice as a young girl to see one where there's a girl in charge. So it definitely hit that itch. Marian was great. She was the only level-headed one among the lot. It also is responsible for, it's not a GIF or a meme, it's a clip, a short clip that goes around every year in the UK. So we call Shrove Tuesday Pancake Day, because the tradition in the UK is to use up your sugar and various kind of nice luxury goods by making pancakes before Lent starts. I think most of us don't know how well we do the Lent bit anymore, but we all still make pancakes on Shrove Tuesday every single year. And there's a song about it from Maid, Marian and Her Merry Men, sung by Daniel John Jules, who's also a musical theatre star. It's kind of a rap where he goes, it's Pancake Day, Pancake Day. And there's a little dance. So if you've seen that going around the internet, if you have any British friends or you are British and you've seen that pop up, that's where that's from. It's from Maid, Marian and Her Merry Men. They were based around the village of Worksop, which is a real village. I was hanging around Nottingham waiting for my husband a few years ago, and I took the dog for a walk in Worksop, and I got ridiculously excited that I was in Worksop. So don't think anyone else would be that excited, but I wasn't. Anyway, so yeah, Maid, Marian and Her Merry Men, absolutely love it. I mean, I don't know how much it would stand up now. I don't know whether to put it in the King's Deer, because yeah, it is a BBC kids show from the 80s. But I don't know. I think I want to put it in Split Phillips Arrow. I just love it. Maybe it's nostalgia goggles, but I just love it. Has to be done. And that section is going to start getting busy, because look at the two we've got left. Prince of Thieves. Love Prince of Thieves. I don't care that he goes to Hadrian's Wall. Somehow Hadrian's Wall is between England and Scotland, and he somehow lands on the south coast of England, and in order to go to Nottingham, which is in the middle of England, in the Midlands, goes via Hadrian's Wall. I don't care. I don't care that he has an American accent. It's the root of a lot of stuff that's made its way into the later ones, like the animosity between Robin Hood and Will Scarlet that comes up in the Taron Egerton one. Comes back to this. Will Scarlet is one of Robin Hood's best mates before this. But Christian Slater's Will Scarlet and Robin having that animosity comes from this film. There's a blind character, popularized the idea of a Moorish character who's come over from the East being in there. The whole, I mean, the thing on the poster with him shooting an arrow with flames behind him, and it's got all the classic stuff from the legend as well. Some of these like more recent reinventions, they skip the bits that are part of the classic story, and it's like, if I'm watching Robin Hood, I want those. So I want him to fight Little John on a log and get pushed in the river, and I want him to end up in the river with Friar Tuck as well, if there's time for that, and I want him to go to an archery contest, and then I want them to kidnap Maid Marian and Robin to storm the castle and rescue her. Yes, I want Maid Marian to have agency and not just be a screaming damsel in distress and all, but I don't care. I want Robin to storm the castle and rescue her, or she can rescue him if it's a Marian-centric version, whichever. But it's just, I love it so much. And of course, Alan Rickman. I mean, Alan Rickman yelling that he's going to eat your heart out with a spoon. Alan Rickman makes everything better. This is interestingly the only one with magic in it. The Robin Hood legends are notable for having like no magic, which is unusual, very unusual for British legend and folklore. There is one scene in a very early ballad where he comes across an old woman who seems to be a death omen, almost a little bit like the Celtic banshee, the Irish banshee, and there's Scottish versions as well. And she's almost a bit like that, this old woman washing clothes at a stream. And even that isn't really magic, it's an omen. And other than that, there's no magic in Robin Hood. It is just straightforward, having fun in the Greenwood storytelling. Interestingly, Prince of Thieves adds a witch. Which, you know, for the medieval period, there's cunning folk. I mean, I don't think they acted quite like she does in the movie. But you can go to a cunning person and you can buy a curse. You can curse somebody. You know, there's witchcraft and magic as there is in pretty much all periods going on. So it's fine to add. It's unusual. But it works. You know, it's quite an interesting addition. Kind of feels like wanting to make it feel a bit more like King Arthur, maybe, or something. They want to add the element of fantasy to it, where really Robin Hood does not have fantasy in it. But still, anyway, that's not really a complaint. More an observation. I mean, I love that movie. I mean, I do have a very strong weakness for early 90s Kevin Costner. So put me in front of this movie or Dances with Wolves or The Bodyguard, or even JFK, which has actual footage of somebody being shot dead in it. And all I'm doing is just sat there going, because I will watch early 90s. I would watch early 90s Kevin Costner read the phone book. I have a weakness. So yeah, that's going, oh, hang on, get back to the right screen. That is going straight up to He Split Philip's Arrow. And finally, Errol Flynn. And again, dear God, I love this movie. It's so good. If you've never seen this movie, watch it. It's in Technicolor, so it doesn't. If you don't watch a lot of classic movies, you don't have to be into classic movies to enjoy this movie. It's so good. Olivia de Havilland as Marian. This is a really great Marian who she does have agency and she takes action, but she does so in a way that makes sense for a medieval woman. And again, I have nothing against the more active versions of Marian or Robin's daughter Gwyn. Marian in the 2010 movie goes full Eowyn and goes into battle in armor, and that's great. Love to see it. But I also appreciate the Sansa Stark variety of female agency, which is taking action in a way that is plausible and possible for you to do when you have not been trained in archery or sword fighting, but you're a very intelligent woman. So Marian kind of spies a little bit for Robin once he's won her over to his side. It is the definitely fantastical end of costuming. The costumes are the kind of, you know, it's Hollywood. It's painted backdrops and costumes that are meant to evoke the idea of the medieval period rather than be accurate. Although there is a lot more accurate veil wearing in this one, if I remember right. Yeah. So we used to watch this as kids. We had it on a VHS that we taped off the telly. And God, we watched it over and over and over. It's beautiful. There's an absolutely gorgeous shot of Robin and his men riding away in the moonlight, escaping the sheriff's men. This one has Guy of Gisborne as the main enemy and the sheriff as kind of an idiot. Some others swap it around. Maid Marian and her merry men has it the other way around. Some don't bother with Guy of Gisborne. Guy of Gisborne is in one of the early ballads. Robin fights him. He is an enemy of Robin Hood. Robin's chief enemy in the ballads was always the Sheriff of Nottingham. Even when he lived in Yorkshire, Sheriff of Nottingham is still his main enemy. I made a whole video about all of that. But yeah, the sheriff usually would be the kind of main villain and the main antagonist, but doing it as a guy instead works fine. The sheriff as a bit of an idiot is kind of funny. It's got the classic scene where Robin shoots one of the king's deer and dumps it on the table in front of Prince John. Prince John is played by Claude Rains, who's great. It's missing Eleanor of Aquitaine, sadly. She's not in this one. She was in the 2010 one. I forgot to mention that. Not quite as impressive as she is in the 50s one in there, but still good. Eileen Atkins is still great. Yeah, she's not in this one, but it also has these nice little historical tidbits like Maid Marian's nurse, who's a character in loads of them, because obviously going back to the historical ballads, she's a young woman. She would have a nurse or a nanny would still be with her until she gets married in the kind of medieval and early modern periods. And Maid Marian's nurse here is partly inspired by the Wife of Bath's tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Another thing that I did not pick up on as a kid didn't make any sense to me. I always wondered what the line meant. She's talking to Much the Miller's son, and she says, "I've had the banns out 5 times," with a really dodgy kind of Cockney English accent. She's saying, "I've had the banns out 5 times," which means the banns of marriage, which is where in the Church of England, well, the Catholic Church in this period, Church of England now, in an English church, whichever is the church in England at the time, you read out the banns of marriage. You say, so and so of whatever parish is going to marry so and so of whatever parish. Does anyone have any objections? Does anyone know any reason they shouldn't get married? Do they have a wife locked in the attic? That kind of thing. And you do that 3 times, and you still do it. This is still part of an English marriage, especially if you get married in a Church of England church in England. You still have to have the banns read out, and they will do it at 3 church services in the lead up to your wedding. We went along and heard ours read out at our local church when we got married. So that's what she's saying, that she's got married 5 times, and it's inspired by the wife of Bath in the Wife of Bath's tale, who has been married 5 times. The Wife of Bath, it's implied, might have finished off some of her husbands. There's a bit of Black Widow potentially going on with the Wife of Bath. I don't think that's the case with Marian's nurse. But she's a great character. None of these passed the Bechdel test, as far as I remember. I'm not sure even Maid Marian and her Merrie Men passes the Bechdel test, because most of them only have 1 female character. And if you do have 2 female characters having a conversation, then it's usually about a man. The 2010 movie has Eleanor asking John's lover, Isabella, and later his wife, Isabella of Angoulême, to give John some bad news. So that, depending how you define a conversation about a man, it's a conversation about telling John some bad news. That one might just squeak past the Bechdel test. Marian and her nurse, I'm pretty sure, only talk about men in this one. But it does get closer, because it does, well, and the nurse doesn't have a name, actually. But it does have 2 prominent female characters, which honestly, in a Robin Hood story, is quite good going. And this is one made in the 30s as well, by the way. So anyway, it is so good. If you've never seen it, please watch it. It's amazing. Love it, love it, love it. Do not be put off by the fact it was made in the 30s. It's got a fantastic musical score that's a great piece of music in its own right. Korngold is the composer. It's a brilliant adventure. Me and my brother used to play at this movie. Obviously, we'd play at sword fighting. It has this sword fight between Robin of Guy and Gisborne on the staircase. If you've ever seen Robin fighting either Guy or the sheriff on a staircase, you can thank this movie for it. Where they stop to talk. So there'll be clash, clash, clash. And then they'll wave their swords in the air from it. This is me waving an imaginary sword in the air. And have a conversation. And then clash, clash, clash again. I just love it. It's brilliant. Errol Flynn gets name dropped in quite a few later versions. Definitely the Doctor Who one name drops Errol Flynn. His look is the look of Robin Hood, with the little beard, hair, pointy hat outfit, from illustrations as well. But this is the classic Olivia de Havilland's brilliant. I used to watch the scene where she talks about what it feels like to be in love as educational when I was like 8 years old. Yeah, it's so good. It does have this quite interesting scene where Robin shows Marian all the poor and injured people that he's trying to help, and they just kind of walk through, and she looks kind of freaked out and like she doesn't want anyone to touch her dress, which is maybe a bit 1930s. But yeah, it's brilliant. And we used to pretend we were Robin and his men swinging across on like vines, probably very implausible for an English forest, but anyway, swinging across on vine ropes to go and attack the sheriff. Loved it. So yeah, that definitely goes up there. So I think these are more or less probably in order. Let's see. That's the order I would put those in. Yeah. Maybe put that one there if we're going to assume this is the top going down. Probably move that one up a little bit. TNG up a little bit. Yep, there we go. I think that's pretty much our list. So thank you to everybody who's popped in and out during the live stream. And it's a horribly awkward time of day. So I think most people are going to watch it on the recording. Thank you to anybody who watches the recording and puts up with all my umming and ahhing, all the stuff I normally edit out, all the coughing and the ums and ahs and the sitting and thinking and staring at the screen that normally would get edited out of my videos. This is the only video going up this week. Next week, Creepy Classics is back after a ridiculously long break. I am going to do a new episode of my Creepy Classics podcast where I retell ancient, medieval, and early modern ghost stories. And this one will be a 18th century, quite a late one, an early modern story from Wales. An encounter from a minister's wife in Wales in the 18th century. That's what we're going to talk about in the podcast. It'll go up on YouTube as well as on all the various podcast apps. So that will be next week's YouTube video. And then I have a few other things planned. Obviously, 3 weeks from today will be the next episode in the History of Witchcraft and Magic in Europe series. And then there's a few things I'm going off and filming over the summer, and I'm also working on exciting project relating to Creepy Classics and the stories, which I will have to give more news about as and when I have news to share on that. Yeah, so I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, we should get the dog to say goodbye before I log off. High five! High five! High five! Good girl. And if you enjoyed this, obviously, please do give it a like and share. And that, of course, helps boost the videos on the channel in the algorithm. So until next time, bye. I need to find the button that says end stream now.